privileged to share space with you and to worship with you. So I'm going to turn the floor over to her, and then during the Q&A, I have some other announcements. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you.
All right, so I have the unique pleasure and challenge of being in this room on Super Bowl Sunday with construction while you are eating after mass with no microphone, and the battery on my laptop is dying, but God is good.
Challenge accepted.
So my presentation will be brief. It was meant to be brief, and God did that on purpose because my laptop is dying. My hope is that we can have dialogue and conversation. If you cannot hear me at any time, please raise your hand, give a shout, give me a signal. I will not get offended. Interrupt me so that I can project more, because I would love for everybody to hear what I'm saying. So people in the back, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent, wonderful. All right, so as Lydia said, my name is Jeanne Lewis. You heard my bio, but many of you have known me as a parishioner for many, many years, and I'm privileged to be here with all of you. Although we are not joyful to talk about this topic, we are empowered to talk about this topic. As Lydia mentioned, I gave a presentation via Zoom for the African Diaspora Ministry in the fall before the election. And so I'm going to review some of that information. So some of you who may have been there, this might be familiar to you. Project 2025. We have been talking about it now for at least a year. And most people hear the words, but they're not fully clear about what it is. What it is what is happening in our government right now. That is what it is. But here's some background on it. The Heritage Foundation, which is a very well-funded, not-for-profit organization, right over on Capitol Hill, across from Union Station, they have a giant building. You can't miss it because they put a big banner on the side that said, "Congratulations, President Trump." Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank, nonprofit organization that is extremely well-funded by billionaires. 100 different state and local level organizations, also nonprofits, collaborated together over the last 5 years or so to draft Project 2025, which is a 900-page document of recommendations for the next conservative president to be elected. And that person is now Donald Trump. So this document was written for any president that wanted to be endorsed and supported by extremely conservative organizations. And I emphasize the word extremely because in my experience, very few people in the United States are 100% conservative or 100% liberal or 100% progressive. Depending on the issue, depending on the circumstance, people vacillate in their political leanings. But the 100 groups that crafted Project 2025 are mostly extremist groups. And I think it's very important to understand that, because some of what they advocate might sound reasonable and we might agree with a few aspects of it. But the intention of the majority of these groups are extremist and do not represent the majority of feelings of people in the country. Project 2025, this research and this document, this directive, was funded primarily by two big funders. 75% of the funding came from two big funders, the Koch network, so you've heard of the Koch brothers, and Leonard Leo, who is a Catholic philanthropist. It was funded to the tune of several hundreds of billions of dollars. So three men, really, if you count the Koch brothers individually, three men leverage their extreme wealth, their outsized wealth, to create a comprehensive policy and government position for our entire country. I want to emphasize that because as we go through the policies or the topics in Project 2025, again, we're going to hear things that we agree with. We're going to hear things that we say, that's not so bad. What is so bad is that three men are controlling the political direction of our country. That is anti-democratic. That is not a safe situation to be in. Project 2025 originally was designed to target evangelical Christians, and I would say a subset of the Catholic Church. So again, Leonard Leo is Catholic, Vice President Vance is Catholic, although that's debatable depending on who you ask. And I don't mean that to be flippant, but his actual conversion into the Catholic Church did not follow the rites that the Catholic Church actually requires to be converted to be Catholic. So I'm not saying that just as a joke. I'm saying it is questionable that he is actually Roman Catholic. But this document was primarily set to target Christians in order to galvanize evangelical Christians in particular, their vote in order to pass this legislation. If you tracked our election in November, about a third of the country voted for Donald Trump, about a third of the country voted for Kamala Harris, and about a third of the country didn't vote. And I'm sorry, a third of people who were eligible to vote. A third of eligible voters voted for Trump, a third of eligible voters voted for Harris, and a third of eligible voters did not vote. This document positioned key players in the Republican Party in order to take power, which is what you're seeing, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And this has been going on since the Reagan administration. So the beginnings of this document, the ideas in this document were starting to be drafted as early as the 1980s. And again, many parts of the plan were in progress in October, and they are definitely in progress now. So that is a general overview, very brief, of Project 2025. Excuse me. So most people hear about Project 2025 and they hear about the policy positions. Project 2025 wants to target immigrants. Project 2025 wants to deny climate change. They want to ban books in schools. And that is true. The document, the 900-page document, does include many, many policy recommendations, and we're already starting to see some of those play out. But it's important to understand that Project 2025, and again, its danger is that it's actually a takeover of our government. It is intended to shift the democratic process, and it has 4 pillars. So the first is a policy agenda, which we've all heard of by now. The second is a personnel database. So it's about creating a pipeline of loyalists that authoritarian politicians can place in key positions in the United States government in order to implement this agenda, which again is anti-democratic. Part of the beauty of our country is having diversity of thought in some of the highest levels of government, all the way up and down government, so that we can actually wrestle with one another and find the best solutions for the whole country. This personnel database is an attempt to identify and groom and cultivate and train loyalists to a particular worldview and exclude everyone else. So we live in Washington, D.C. I know many of my friends have already lost their jobs. I'm sure everybody in this room can raise their hand about a friend whose job is under threat or a friend who has lost their job. This is an outgrowth of this personnel database. The Presidential Administration Academy is another form of that. So it's a training opportunity. It's a training playbook to help groom these folks. And then the 180-day playbook is where we are right now. That's the president. Those are the executive orders, which we'll talk about. Those are the appointees to government agencies, which we'll talk about. It is the militarization of police and ICE, which we'll talk about. So those are the 4 pillars. And it's really important if you're speaking with anyone or if you're trying to understand Project 2025, it's not just one bill in Congress or one executive order. It is actually a comprehensive plan to fundamentally shift the ability of people in this country to participate in our government. And that is why it is. So I want to dig in a little bit on the concentration of power and loyalists. That is a fundamental aspect of Project 2025. I have a link here, which you all can reference later if you want to see the full list of high-end appointments that have happened so far. There are other lists online that are viable that you can take a look at. Again, many of us have worked for or with the government. We know that presidential appointees go all the way up and down the government. But I want to focus on top cabinet positions and key positions here. So, lost my page there. All right. So Robert Kennedy Jr., we've all heard of him. He ran for office, then he dropped out and he gave his endorsement to Donald Trump. He has been appointed, and I think as of now has been confirmed by the Senate to Department of Health and Human Services. He is a vaccine denier. He advocates for removing fluoride from our water supply, which is why I have good teeth, and many of us who grew up in this country have good teeth. Now, other things that he wants to do, I'm not so mad at. He wants to have more scrutiny on pharmaceutical companies. He wants to have more scrutiny around chemicals that are used in big box foods. And so again, sometimes some of the policies that you'll see might be things that you agree with. But Robert Kennedy Jr. is dangerous in my opinion, because he mixes some of these ideas, some of these, I would say, good accountability measures with conspiracy theories and information that is not undergirded by science. And when there's strong scientific evidence that shows the opposite, he still denies it and moves in his own direction. And that is the danger of having someone at the head of Department of Health and Human Services who does not fundamentally believe in science. Kash Patel, FBI. So Kash Patel, President Trump has said that he wants to appoint Kash Patel to the FBI. Kash worked in his previous administration in law enforcement. He is a loyalist to Donald Trump. The president cannot appoint Kash Patel until the current head of the FBI resigns or unless the president fires him, which is a very difficult thing to do. But I put Kash on this list because, again, it's an example of finding someone who is a deep loyalist to the president and giving that person a position of power. Linda McMahon, who has been appointed as the head of the Department of Education. She was one of his largest donors. She was an executive for the wrestling affiliation, WWE. Her husband also was an executive for WWE. I don't know what that has to do with education, but we all have many gifts and talents. Perhaps she knows a lot. I don't know. But what she does want to do is ramp up school choice and give power to states. Now, understanding this is important to understand our history. There's a lot of conversation about school vouchers and school choice. It's important to understand that in the United States of America, school vouchers and school choice is directly connected to Brown versus Board of Education, which was a lawsuit brought to the Supreme Court in the 1950s that led to integration of schools. School choice and school vouchers was started in the US South in order for white families to be able to maintain segregation and use public tax dollars to do it. That is the origin of school choice. Now, whatever we think about school choice now and the opportunities of school choice, and I know we live in DC, which has a lot of charter schools, I think it is okay to have charter schools. I think it is okay to have school choice. But when we have to understand the origin of that, because there is a movement in Project 2025 and by people like Linda McMahon and Betsy DeVos, who you may have heard of, to completely privatize education, which means that all of our tax dollars would be distributed and to remove federal influence from education. A good friend of mine used to work at the Department of Education. She has shared with me how much movement is happening to completely erase all federal influence and standards from education. And the rhetoric is that we would give education back to the states. In Washington, DC, which is not yet a state, we'll get to that in a second, that might be okay because we have a diverse population, we have a highly educated population, we have people with means and resources, we have a diversity of wealth. And so in our community, if we have local ownership of our schools, we can probably make it work. St. Augustine is a really great example. In states like South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, and some of the poorest states in the United States, they are heavily dependent on federal dollars. They're heavily dependent on federal influence and standards in order to provide a quality education for children. And so that is why having an overabundance of school choice is very dangerous. Chris Wright, Department of Energy. Chris Wright is currently the CEO of an oil and gas company. He is now in charge of the Department of Energy. He wants to increase fracking and drilling of oil, no surprise. Okay. Russ Vought, the Office of Management and Budget. He's one of the primary authors of Project 2025. And so again, if he is overseeing the entire budgetary responsibility for the United States government, he is a person who has this larger plan in mind and wants to drive in that direction. And probably the most famous of the folks, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. We don't talk about Vivek as much, but it's important to pay attention to. But Elon Musk is now in charge of the recently created Department of Government Efficiency. Elon Musk, as you know, is one of the richest, if not the richest man in the United States of America. Does anybody know what the most valuable commodity is right now in the United States? Throw out a guess. What's the most valuable commodity? Data. It's information. It's information. So Elon Musk, who is a businessman, who is about the business of making more money, now has access to all of our data. And he is systematically going through every single government agency and accessing that data with very little accountability. I think right now, his current stop is Department of Labor, if I'm tracking correctly. That's where he's heading. He hit Department of, he hit USAID first, gutted USAID. Now he's at Department of Labor. And so under the guise of reducing the size of government and making the government more efficient, he is also gaining access to the data of thousands and thousands of federal employees and other people in the country who have access to those federal agencies. This is very, very, very dangerous. I cannot emphasize how dangerous this is. So if you want to see the full appointment list, it's here. But the point that I want to make with these appointments, when you look at Robert Kennedy, who has no medical experience, Linda McMahon, who has no education experience, Chris Wright, who has business interest in energy, but not scientific or policy interest in energy, Russ Vought, who is controlling the budget, but actually helped craft this entire agenda, and Elon Musk, again, who is looking for, in my opinion, he's looking for his next monopoly on business. These appointments illustrate an authoritarian tactic of appointing loyalists and rewarding loyalists so that they can then benefit from the government appointments that they have. All of that is the opposite of democracy. All of that is the opposite of public service. All right. Next, I want to talk about executive orders. In his first month in office, Donald Trump signed more than 50 executive orders. I did not put them all on the list. I can give you a link if you want it. I did not put them all on the list. Many of them have already been covered in some of what we already talked about. The people he's appointing are implementing those executive orders. But I wanted to give a quick overview of a few of them. So revoking clearance of government officials who opposed him. So Donald Trump has already tried to revoke the clearance of people who prosecuted him for the January 6th insurgency. There's an executive order to revoke birthright citizenship, which is currently under legal challenge. There's an executive order to repeal former President Biden's executive orders, which he signed in his last few months in office, which feels real petty, if you ask me, because the executive order literally says, like, repeal Joe Biden stuff. Like, it's not like this idea is not efficient for government. It's like, if Joe Biden signed it, take it off. That's what the executive order says. Declaring a national emergency in order to increase fuel and energy sales. So under our law, when a national emergency is declared, you can start to waive certain rules. You can do things that you wouldn't do in normal times. So the president has declared a national emergency, which would allow folks to increase fuel and energy sales. He wants to restore the death penalty in states that have taken it out, and I will come back to that one in a second. And then one we've all heard about in DC is suspending USAID, foreign assistance, and refugee programs for 90 days. So I want to point out the death penalty to point out the hypocrisy, again, so that we don't get confused or bamboozled about what the real self-interest is of this administration. So the administration says that they want to restore state rights around education, hence school choice. They want to restore state rights around reproductive rights and abortion, hence a lot of the efforts that they're doing to do that. But when it comes to the death penalty, where many states have said, this is no longer viable for us, this is not something we want to do, the president has said, no, you must implement the death penalty. You must go for the death penalty in crimes of certain types. This is not about state rights. Don't let anybody fool you. This is not about returning power to the people. Don't let anybody fool you. This is about a fringe minority of people in our country who have a very particular view of what the country should and should not look like, and are doing everything and manipulating our laws and our government in order to assert that point of view. And so it's really important to look for the incongruities and look for the hypocrisy, because again, there are some things that I agree with. There are some things you're going to agree with. But this hoarding of power and removing power away from people in our democracy is what's most dangerous. So I want to talk a little bit in detail about the suspension of USAID and immigration. Oh, actually, before I go to the next slide, notice it's for 90 days. So there are only certain things that can happen by law, and we'll talk about what we could do and why that's important to note later. But it can only happen for 90 days. So part of the aggression that you see to fire people, to pressure people to quit their jobs, to make people come home quickly is because they only have 90 days. Also, there are many things that are under legal threat right now. So like revoking birthright citizenship, that would require a change to the Constitution. That is probably not going to fly, but if you could scare people enough into thinking about it before the lawsuit goes forward, you could do a lot of damage. So it's really important to note that some of these things have a time frame on them and can be prevented or resisted. Immigration. So Africa Diaspora Ministry, we are Africa Diaspora Ministry. Oftentimes when we talk about immigration in this country, we're talking about people coming from our southern borders. But we know that people from the African diaspora in the United States are disproportionately affected by harmful immigration policies and practices in this country. We do not talk about our Asian American brothers and sisters who have immigrated here and the immigration challenges that they might face. And we also don't talk about white immigrants who are also potentially going to be caught up in this, but are not the targets of this, right? So I wanted to dig in a little bit about immigration so that we understand what's happening. I'm just gonna check my battery, make sure I got time. All right. Okay, ICE. ICE is the law enforcement body that prosecutes immigration violations. The executive order, one of the executive order, like a third of them are targeting immigrants. One of the executive orders is targeting criminals, but that definition is very broad. So historically, ICE has prioritized people who are affiliated with terrorists, who are affiliated with gangs, with drugs, or who are affiliated with human trafficking, really serious federal crimes. The definition of criminal has been expanded to anybody who has come into the country illegally. So basically anybody who's undocumented is the same level of criminal as a serial rapist, human trafficker, okay? The effort is to also include misdemeanors. I don't think that this has been successful, but the effort is to include misdemeanors in the definition of criminal. So if a 14-year-old steals a bag of potato chips from the corner store and she is undocumented, or maybe she is documented, maybe she was born here, but her parents are undocumented, that crime, because it's a crime, is equated to a human trafficker. Because the definition of criminal, and so some of the folks who are in charge of ICE are saying anybody who's come here without the proper documentation is a criminal. So ICE is targeting criminals, but I put that in quotation marks because it's very dangerous. ICE is including searches and arrests near sensitive locations, including churches and schools. So Faith and Public Life, we have a member in Ohio that during the last Trump administration provided sanctuary to an undocumented woman. So she lived in this church for 4 years. Her children were born in the United States. She was undocumented. She lived in the church for 4 years. ICE would not go into the church and arrest her, while lawyers and others supported her trying to actually gain legal citizenship in the United States. And she now is a citizen in the United States. Churches, schools, and hospitals were seen as sensitive locations because of the services that we provide. Schools are intended to educate and protect children. If children are afraid that they're going to be arrested, they are not going to come to school, they are not going to be educated. If someone is sick, if someone is in labor, if someone is being domestically abused and they are worried that by going to the hospital, they're going to be arrested by ICE, they are not going to get the health care that they need. And so our teachers, our doctors, our nurses, our clergy, they take oaths of service to the community. And that is why these spaces have been sensitive and protected so that those servants, those public servants can fulfill their oath while the folks that they're serving do not feel criminalized. This has been erased. So no longer are schools, hospitals, and churches considered sensitive locations where ICE cannot enter. If ICE wanted to come in here right now and figure out who was a citizen and who was not, and they're not going to look very hard, they could do it. That is the reality that we're living. Now extrapolate that to our children coming to St. Augustine School on Monday. If ICE wanted to come into St. Augustine School on Monday and claim that some of our children are undocumented and detain them, they could do it. ICE is leveraging the military and other law enforcement agencies for more active searches and deportations. Oh, yes. I'm sorry, is there a question? Yeah. No. She asked if they need a warrant, and the answer is no, because they're not searching the property for contraband. They are coming to arrest a criminal.
How many states have resistance against it? They still can come in?
This is a federal executive order. So it doesn't matter, it supersedes state law.
So can they remove individuals without any proof of their
Yes.
status?
So that's part of what I wanted to talk about, the last bullet point. This law enforcement, in fact, impacts a wide range of people. So there have been reports of native-born African-Americans like myself who've been arrested and detained for a day. There have been reports of Native Americans who have been arrested because they're suspected of being undocumented immigrants. There have been reports of people from mixed status families also being arrested. So this affects all of us. If you are a citizen, but maybe you are friends with someone who is not, for example, one of my husband's best friends is undocumented. He is Nigerian. The reason he is undocumented is because someone in his family stole his identity. Okay. So he is not a criminal. He did not cross the border illegally. He is not a drug dealer. He is just a Black man trying to live his life. And his brother stole his identity. His literal brother stole his identity. And so he has struggled to get it back for the better of 20 years. We all know people who have similar situations. And even as people of God, even if someone is a drug dealer, even if someone did cross the border illegally, they deserve a certain level of dignity and due process, right? So this impacts all of us. Deportations are already happening. Roughly 5,000 people have been deported so far. Many deportations are going to Guantanamo Bay, which, as you know, has mixed status, right? Because it's not in the US, it's sort of in Cuba, but not really. Many things happen outside of certainly federal law. And also there have been accusations outside of international law happening at Guantanamo Bay. But I do want to emphasize that ICE and the federal government are leveraging the military. So they have sent more active duty military to the US southern border and incentivizing and deploying other law enforcement agencies, so local police forces, to help activate search and deportations. Now, again, I want to do a little Sankofa moment. I want to do a little bit of history because historically, the United States our economy has relied on a certain level of free or low-cost labor since its inception. This is really important to understand. Chattel slavery provided a level of free and low-cost labor that allowed the US economy to thrive. There's a really beautiful exhibit in historical Williamsburg that recreates a plantation. And I learned a lot there because it talks about, it's a small plantation, right? So a family that owned 5 to 7 people. And the history of this plantation is that even if you wanted to be a landowner in colonial United States of America and not own slaves, you could not economically compete in this economy without owning slaves. You could not do it. So since its inception, our country has relied on a level of free and low-cost labor. When slavery was abolished, as many of us know, there was a negotiation between the Confederate States and the federal government to say that slavery is abolished except in certain cases. Anybody know what the certain cases are? Marlisha, I know you know what the certain cases are. If you are convicted, it is still currently legal in the United States to have that person work for no cost or for low cost. Who are the people who helped put out the fires in California? Incarcerated people. Incarcerated firefighters put out some of those fires in California. So I know years ago, the social justice ministry under Lydia's vision read The New Jim Crow, which is a book that really lays out the connection between our incarceration system and the economy in the United States. Over the last 5 to 6 years, Black Lives Matter has been very, very clear about wanting to abolish the criminal justice system, using the word abolition. So there has been a movement, a better education, a movement in the United States about abolishing the criminal justice system and abolishing prisons and literally setting the captives free which is what Jesus wants us to do. I am offering to you, it is no coincidence. It is no coincidence that we are now rounding people up and finding new ways and new justifications to incarcerate people in this country. It is no coincidence. And that is not a conspiracy theory. That is the history of the United States. We have always had low or no cost labor. And so it's just, again, it's really important to understand the connection between some of these things and some of the people involved. The donors to Project 2025, the Koch brothers, have a huge interest in private prisons, an outsized interest in private prisons. So there's a lot of connections. All right.
In person, if I'm trying to take a little bit. The United States has always been in business of slavery.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's been in our, it's been in our Constitution. Like Marlisha said, even when slavery was abolished, there was a caveat. There was a caveat. Yes, I have a question in the back. There was a question in the back. I'll repeat it. So she's saying that the founder of the Heritage Foundation is recorded on video in the 1980s, is that correct, in Dallas? Saying that part of his goal is ensuring that everyone does not have a vote. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Yep. So I appreciate you raising that because I did not get into all the different aspects of Project 2025. We did that previously. I pulled out the climate agenda, the voting rights agenda, the gender agenda, the food agenda. I wanted to focus on immigration today. And I wanna round us out before we open up for more questions and discussion about what we can do. So I wanna go down to my last bullet point first, be encouraged, right? Even though this sounds really, really bad, and it is really, really bad, I want you to be encouraged because joy and hope is resistant. And every time we succumb to fear or we make a decision out of panic, we are actually fueling authoritarianism. And so I say that to myself every day. I said that to my staff at staff meeting on Monday. I'll probably say it again tomorrow at the next staff meeting, right? Every time we succumb to panic or fear, we are fueling authoritarianism. One of the tactics globally of authoritarians is to create fake crisis and then solve it, and keep people unsteady, ungrounded, right? And so we have an opportunity and we have an advantage as people of faith because we have Jesus, we have our practices, we have our prayer, we have our faith to ground us. Practically, one thing that you can do is contact your representatives in the House and the Senate especially Republicans, to ask them to block appointments. I apologize for the lack of S, and bad legislation. You should be looking every week, just like go online, find you a news source, Associated Press, BBC, Al Jazeera, find you a reputable news source, find what's coming down the pike, and just put it on your calendar every single Monday. Call your representatives. But I say especially Republicans because what we've seen with the appointments is that there are some Republicans who say, this doesn't sound right, or this seems a little shady, and they're getting a lot of pressure to comply. They're getting a lot of pressure to just fall in line. They need to hear from their constituents to say, no, we do not want you to do this. We do not want this to happen. This is bad. If you live in a district, like if you live in Washington, D.C., Eleanor Holmes Norton doesn't have a vote, call your cousin, call your mama, call your sister, call your brother, call your daddy, and ask them to call there. So my mother lives in Texas. My friend, she has made a whole script for her mother. She's like, Mom, you are retired, you want to do something, this is the phone number, this is where you call, this is the script, this is what you said, right? So if you in your district, you have all Democrats, or you live in DC, find a friend, someone in your network that you can encourage them to call their representative. Do not comply in advance. This is the most important thing. I need everybody to put this on your social media, get a t-shirt, get a button, get a sticker, tell everybody you know. If you have to bus stop, turns the person to your neighbor and be like, do not comply in advance. This is really, really important. So I know that, we have many federal employees or former federal employees. My friends who are federal employees are reporting that they get multiple emails every single day pressuring them to quit their jobs, saying if you don't quit your job now, then you're not going to get your pension, you're not going to get your retirement. Do not comply in advance, because like I said, they have 90 days. This executive order is 90 days, right? So Lent is coming up, make it your Lenten practice, right? This is your suffering for Jesus. Do not comply in advance. Make you give up, period. So it depends on the different orders, but they only have 90 days to enforce the reduction in staff, and then it gets revisited. So I'm not sure. I actually think it depends on what happens, how many people voluntarily leave after the 90 days. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that they can only enforce this order for 90 days.
Maybe 1,800 already. That's it. What happened to those? Just 2%. What happened to them?
Only 2%, I think.
Well, what do you mean what happened? And they quit their jobs. So.
And they just accepted what he said he was going to give them. They can't retract it. They can't say.
They could, but they don't want to. So the tactic is to get as many people to leave their jobs as possible so that they can either shutter agencies or they can fill the agencies with people who are loyalists. So that is the tactic. So that's what I'm saying. If you have a job, you have a good government job, please keep your good government job, and then give me your name and I will pray for you every single day. Because, and this is only one example, there are other things too. People might ask you for names. I know in other states, people are asking for names of students, or do you know any undocumented folks? They're asking folks to tattle and to snitch on their neighbors. What I'm saying is do not comply in advance. And I see Lydia here. Let me get through the rest of these and then I want to go to Q&A. Don't get distracted by misinformation. I don't post a lot on social, but I'm on there. I see the videos, I see the posts, I see the rumors. It is hard to tell what is true. Even if it's a video, it could be fake, okay? Go to the Associated Press, go to the BBC, go to Al Jazeera, go to the Washington Post, go to the New York Times, read, well, I'm suggesting you read your news. I'm suggesting pretty much you don't watch it, or you can watch it, but don't believe anything. I'm suggesting you read your news. And it doesn't have to be a lot. You don't have to be a news junkie. There's an app called Flipboard. I just have a couple things. I get it every day. It's free. And then I can see my articles and my headlines. But you want to go to a reputable source. If you see a video on Instagram, fact check it before you post it, before you repost it, before you reply to it. Because again, the tactic of an authoritarian is to distract people, to overwhelm you with misinformation, with dire information, so that you get confused and you can't pay attention to what's actually happening. And it's still fairly easy to find, right? protect the vulnerable with your voice and your resources, no matter who they are. So I know that we all have different opinions about different issues, different social issues, for example, right? We might have different opinions about trans people. We might have different opinions about abortion. We might have different opinions about immigrants. The point is, it doesn't matter, because if the federal government is sweeping up trans people, then straight Black women could be next. If the federal government is sweeping up Latinx immigrants, then Asian American immigrants could be next. If the federal government is sweeping up Haitians, then the Asians could be next, right? It doesn't matter who the person is or whether or not you agree with their lifestyle. Protect the vulnerable with your voice and with your resources. If somebody needs a kind word, if somebody needs a recommendation for a job, if somebody needs a little bit of money to pay their light bill, if somebody needs a connection to a lawyer or a resource or someone else that you might have access to, give it to them, no matter who they are, because this is a moment for solidarity, and it is very, very important that we stand with each other, because it literally could be you next week. How many of us, or how many of our friends are federal workers, and we thought that our jobs were secure? Career federal employees who have served for decades in their jobs and in their agencies, wanting to be good public service to the community, have lost their jobs and might be on the share network next month. You never know. So it's really, really important for us to protect every single person who's being targeted and vulnerable as a child of God who deserves human dignity and who deserves respect. Lastly, I'll say, pray about what your role is and focus on that by joining with others and organize. So I intentionally didn't do a big slide with like, you can join this group and this nonprofit and this agency, because we actually are all already networked. If you're in this room, you're already doing something. Nobody in here is just sitting on your couch watching TV all day, okay? So what is important, because there's so much chaos, there's so much noise, which again is a tactic of authoritarianism to overwhelm you. It's very, very important for you to be discerning and to pray about, how can I serve in this moment according to my talent and gifts? Just like the scripture reading today, what is God asking of you specifically? And, you know, I have friends who are activists. They've been marching every single day this week. They've been out there every single day this week. What I've been doing is building a campaign in my job to protect churches and schools. So I have not been marching. I have not been out in the streets. I've been at work from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single day, building this plan. And on Monday, it's going to launch, right? So pray about what your role is. Don't get distracted about what other people are doing. And your role might seem small to other people. Maybe your role is making food for others. Maybe your role is putting together a daily text message of encouragement to other people. Maybe your role is protesting. Maybe your role is advocating. Maybe your role is writing letters. But we each have a unique role to play, and all of it is necessary. So we can't judge each other, but we also have to discern what is our role to play. And again, be encouraged, because we are the people of God. We are anointed by the Holy Spirit with spiritual gifts. As Father Pat said, we have been called for this time. We are in this time and this place for a reason. And all you have to do right now is ask God what the reason is, and then be obedient and do what he tells you. So I will pause there. And Lydia, I think you want to facilitate a Q&A.
Anybody else struggling like I am? Oh my goodness. So powerful, so powerful. So I just want to make some acknowledgements before we go into Q&A. And a friend of mine, Bob Stumps, is here from Holy Trinity. Would you wave your hand or stand and everything? Thank you. He participated in racial healing circles at Holy Trinity. A couple of us have joined those and have done that for a reason, as a part of that coming together and solidarity and joining different communities together. So thank you. Did you want to say
one of my colleagues who both put
Okay, I wanted you to introduce, please.
Good evening.
So two from Holy Trinity. Thank you. Any other parishes represented? Okay, because we're also in partnership with St. Matthew's, St. Camilla's, St. Teresa's. Okay, so thank you very much. We also have Ms. Joni Eisenberg here from WPFW. She has a program, every Monday at 10 a.m. And she is, for decades, has been an activist in the public health sector. And her program right, of course, on WPFW 89.3, the Pacifica Network is that if you're not a regular listener, you need to join, because not only do they get to the truth, but if you're feeling like you need some healing, you just listen to a couple of their shows, even and you're much better. So thank you, Joni, for coming. Thank you, Joni.
If I could just make a quick announcement, not about the radio, but perhaps a lot of people know that on Tuesday, there's a big rally in support of the federal workers being organized by the American Federation of Government Employees. That's
AFG is doing a rally on Tuesday. What
right,
time?
Tuesday, AFG from 12 to 1
Okay.
at the Upper Senate State Constitution Avenue in Delaware. People are meeting in the Hyatt Regency at 11:30. That's 12 to 1 on Tuesday.
Okay, and so thank you. Okay, so now for St. Augustine people, the chair of the parish council is here, Marlisha.
Oh, well. I'm actually immediate past chair, but I'm glad to be here, and thank you very much for hosting this very important event.
The chair of our homeless ministry is here, Marshall Lyons. And the chair of our social justice action ministry is here, Alyssa Atkinson. Was she able to stay? Okay, she was here. She brought a bunch of people with her. Thank you so much. Sure, they have a very, very strong ministry. Okay, so the first question, who has questions? I just wanted to say, while people are getting their questions together, this is the first time, and correct me if I'm wrong, that someone has run for president, right? This shows how authoritarian it is.
First.
Has run for president, won, but still keeps their campaign propaganda on television. Like every couple of hours, you get this President Trump just doing this, and I have never, I'm in my 60s, I have never seen that after an election. So I said, okay, so it has begun, the indoctrination has begun, okay? And it just gives me, oh, I turn it off when it comes on. Okay, first question.
So maybe just one that I have to ask. So one of the tactics that I've seen him use is that he skirts around legalities.
Yes.
And then he also follows the rules with certain things. One of the reasons why he chooses to follow the rules sometimes, they don't go around.
Yeah, so Lydia was alluding to this. So I keep using the word authoritarianism. So there is a long history and a global history of how to be a good dictator, right? That's not what the books are called, but that's what the book should be called, how to be a good dictator, okay? And so one of the rules is, again, to create chaos. So you create problems, you create fake problems, and then you solve the problem. You create confusion. So you mix misinformation and disinformation with accurate information so that people stop understanding, they stop believing that anything can be true, and they stop understanding what is true. So his entire rhetoric for the last 8, 10, however many years it's been, fake news, that is a tactic of authoritarianism to get people to lose faith in what is true. Because when people stop believing that truth can even exist, you can tell people anything. But Americans aren't dumb. So that's why I'm saying, like, we do actually still have really good access to information out there. All of this is psychological and emotional. So following some rules and breaking other rules, that is about creating chaos. That's an agent of chaos. And that there's all kinds of interesting physiological and psychological science. What that creates for us is it puts us in a fight or flight state. It triggers the oldest parts of our brains so that we actually can't think rationally. We can't calm ourselves down. We feel sick. We can't sleep, and we can't think rationally. So all of this is a series of manipulation tactics to prevent us from thinking rationally, which we actually know how to do and what to do.
I have a question.
Wait a minute, let me get a couple more voices around for that.
Okay.
Thank you. Jeanne Lewis, thank you so much for doing this.
Okay.
I thought, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about, some ISIS tactics like rusing. So I work at a school, as you know, we've been told that ICE does need a warrant before they can come into the school building, but we need to be mindful of their tactics. Sometimes they say things like, someone is a criminal, or they're, like you were saying, and we're here to arrest them, when they have no warrant for their arrest. Sometimes they'll say, it's an emergency and we have to get in. Like they ruse, they make up scenarios in the absence of having a warrant. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I appreciate.
And then,
Yeah.
add on to that question
Yeah.
too, just if you could add in and talk about like the collaboration that's being encouraged between local law enforcement and ICE. So it might not be ICE agents, but actually local law enforcement showing up.
Correct. So I'm glad you raised that question. I think one other thing you can do, which should be on the slide, is a know your rights training. The challenge is that we're in a time where our rights are a little bit in flux, like our rights are shifting right now because of the executive orders, and it's hard to know what's true. But you're absolutely right. And what you're describing, Okezie, is not new. Law enforcement in various forms has used tactics like this. So depending on people not knowing what their rights are, in order to gain access, in order to gain entry, in order to get people to comply with information. So I'm not a legal expert on that, but what I can do is email Lydia later if folks registered with some access to information, or if other people in the room know places that do know your rights trainings, you can do that. Because there are a lot of civil rights groups, especially in DC, who can do that training for you. But you're right, Okezie, it just goes back to what I was saying before about not complying in advance. So for your environment, for your school environment, understanding what your rights are as a school, understanding what your rights are in your home, understanding what your rights are in your workplace. Marlisha, in terms of other law enforcement, right now it's mostly the military. So using active duty military in order to enforce some of this. But there is talk about incentivizing local law enforcement to support ICE. So tying federal dollars, many states and many local jurisdictions get federal dollars for their law enforcement agencies. So there's some talk about tying some of that funding to partnering with ICE and complying with ICE, which is something we need to pay attention to.
I just wanted to comment about the legal aspect. I thought that was such a good point you raised. And I think even in legal realms, he is absolutely, and they are absolutely using this because the legal routes are being shut down. So the argument to do things legally is then being cut off. For example, with immigration, for anybody who then says, okay, if we cut down on illegal immigration, quote unquote, since nobody is illegal, people should do this legally. Well, they immediately stopped all legal immigration into the country whilst deploying ICE. So there is no other avenue for that. And so I think that people really use this legal argument to the favor. And even when it comes to shutting down the government, at least through USAID, they pretend to go through the legal routes. They access to everybody's servers illegally.
Right.
They said they were going to take 90 days. They did not. They moved forward anyways. There is no review, and they go through and cut whilst people are distracted by trying to get waivers to continue federal funding for most marginalized people around the world. And so I think that's a really good point to bring up, and that how the legal avenues are being weaponized too.
And I just want to build on that very briefly. So the other issue is that by breaking one law, it creates an avenue for people to sue, right? So there's an organization called the Advancement Project. They do civil rights, very strong organization. So they've been monitoring this. A law is broken, great, we're going to sue Donald Trump. He can't do this. So while people are tied up in suing him about this one thing, as Catherine was saying, stuff is already moving. So it's about asking for forgiveness, not asking for permission. Right. So it's a very aggressive, like, let me just do the thing and people will have to keep up with me. People are trying to figure out, do I sue on this one? Do I not sue on that one? Can I prevent, et cetera, and so forth. So again, it's a tactic of creating
That's why
chaos.
they're being so aggressive.
Exactly,
They know it takes time to go into the courts.
exactly.
They're not afraid of breaking the law to do this. right?
Exactly.
They are breaking the law.
And
to
it,
do
and
this.
it is about intimidation, because while someone might be suing about what they've done at USAID, several thousand employees say, you know what, I'm done with this. I can't deal with this stress. I need to have another job. I have my kids. And so they'll voluntarily leave. So all of this tactically is happening. More
So
questions?
we're gonna go Patricia, and then Bob,
You have
and
one.
then Almas. Okay,
Okay, so,
I'm sorry.
When you
Oh,
get to
okay,
it,
okay,
let me know.
okay.
so I'm having an issue, it seems like, the country's going in a place of normalization. Like it's, and they want us to come off as, oh, it's no big deal, how do you, I'm finding myself having a hard time discerning this. What suggestions or nitpicks can you give me to help me with that, because I'm having a big issue with that, because nothing is normal about this.
Correct. Correct. So nothing is normal about this. And that's why I had a mix of things on the, what I'm gonna call the resistance side, right? So there's active things we could do, call our representatives, get the information. But this is a time, there is a spiritual aspect of this too, right? Part of what I share with my staff is that Donald Trump is actually not our enemy. Donald Trump is a representation of something bigger that is happening, right? The people that he's appointing, the people that voted for him, they're not our enemies. They are people who are caught up in like a bigger movement that's happening. There's a very small few of white men, quite frankly, who want to thrust this country back into a place where they have control. And so the discernment that we have to do, I think the prayer is really important. I think being in community is really important. Understanding what my role is really important while we do all the other external things. Because if we can, when we can stay grounded in our spirits and in our minds, we are able to navigate this. I will offer, I've been thinking about my grandmother a lot. I named her when we did the ancestor acknowledgement, Hilda Donald. My grandmother was from rural Louisiana. She had an 8th grade education. Her parents were divorced. Her mother's boyfriends used to try to sexually assault her on the regular. She grew up, had many, many children, and ended up starting a church when she was in her mid-50s. Many people told her she could not do it because of all the things that who she was, but she did it, and she was very successful in serving in the way that God asked her to serve. I think about her every day now because this is not a typical time. You're absolutely right. This is not normal. And I don't believe that my relatively privileged upbringing, being a Black girl growing up here, going to Catholic school, that is not going to save me. What's going to save me is the same energy that my grandma brought, where the whole world was against her. And she said, but God told me to do this, and I will do it. I don't care what the priest says. I don't care what my husband says. I don't care what my adult children say. I don't care what the people across the street say. God told me to do this, and I'm doing it. That is the spiritual energy that we need to bring to this moment in order not to despair and in order to make it through. And I will offer that every single one of us in this room, no matter our race or our age, has ancestors who have survived in that moment, who have navigated a moment like this one, and we need to remember them. I'm so grateful for you for calling in the ancestors today. We need to remember them in a very visceral and a very real way. Because all the other stuff we thought we had, our education and our house and our money and all our stuff, that ain't gonna save us right now. It's Hilda. Hilda's gonna save us right now, right? And so I just want to offer that is how I am discerning this moment.
Suing
Mhm.
because it takes so long,
Yes,
but I don't think we can stop.
that's right.
And
Yes.
in today's front section, the Washington Post, toward the back, there's an article by one of the regular columnists, Dana Milbank. And in 3 paragraphs at the beginning of this column, he identifies the 20 or so laws that they have already been accused of violating.
Mhm.
And then next paragraph talks about the articles of the Constitution
if they are violated. So I think that's important for us to keep those in mind.
Yes,
And I have one other thought. That contact Republicans. I don't have any Republicans, it wasn't Virginia, they're all Democrats.
Yep.
However,
who are your senators?
farmers,
But wait, who are your senators in Virginia?
Warner and, Kane,
Mhm.
and,
Democrats.
they're, they're all, anybody, but when you think about talking to Republicans, even though you're not their constituents, think about what is happening to their constituents. For example, if USAID doesn't buy wheat from the US farmers to give to people around the world, that's a $2 billion market that those farmers have lost for their products.
Yep.
$2 billion. The USAID pays them so they get wheat sent around the world.
Yep.
That's the kind of thing we ought to be telling the Republican representatives.
Yep. And the Democrats, quite frankly, because Democrats care about money too. Don't get it confused. I appreciate that, Bob. And so to give that in context, I would say, if you feel called that what you need to do is call multiple representatives, partner with a group who does advocacy on a regular basis. It can give you those talking points. So Network Lobby is a Catholic group that does advocacy, and they lobby around a large number of issues and will give you a brief and a talking point and put you in a cohort and train you up. So when you make the call, you know what it is to say. So you're not doing it alone. Maybe you are not a lawyer. Maybe you don't feel called to track the litigation, but you can be reassured that there are attorneys who are suing. Their bread and butter, their life, their vocation in this life is to sue in situations like this. And some of y'all are in here. So that, again, I just want us to be really clear. We are not all called to do all the things, but we should be encouraged that somebody is called to do all the things that we're not called to do, and they are happening. Our responsibility, in order to fight the overwhelming despair, this is really important, is to do the thing that we are called to do. I mentioned some of my friends have been out protesting every day. Some of them are gonna get burnt out. I've seen it before. They already been burnt out. They already had 2 nervous breakdowns in the last 10 years, right? And it's coming again because they are not yet discerning what is their thing to do. They're caught up in the frenzy. Now, some of the people who are out there, this is what they're called to do. And they've been doing it consistently, and they are grounded and they are trained to do it. So again, I just want to emphasize it's really important, because for us to care for ourselves and to rely on the Holy Spirit to live out our specific calling, it's just like the sermon today, to live out our specific calling